My name's Hawke and my children have wheels. I like anything that drives, anything that sounds good, and the weirder the better. I don't know, I mean, cars have always been around me. My grandfather has an old Valiant wagon he's had his whole life. He bought it new. My dad was always sort of tinkering with cars, liked cars. My dad's father, my other grandfather, worked for Jack Brabham's race team. I don't know, they've just sort of always been on the fringe, and then my brother sort of dragged me around everywhere he went, so I sort of just ended up playing with whatever he was playing with, and rest is history. My grandfather, he was actually a doctor, but he was also an engineer. He worked on Jack Brabham's first few F1 cars he worked on the oil flow dynamics on the car. So he had to make sure it got through the car without any hindrance and everything worked just so, and yeah, still learning a lot about that. Unfortunately he's passed away, so I can't ask him, but yeah, really cool little bit of history of that. My earliest memory of cars? Probably, weirdly enough, my mum traded in this old red Corolla to buy another car, and the memory I have driving out of the dealership, no one had explained to me as whatever I was, 6-year-old, that it was getting left there. So I was in the back of the brand new car, looking out the back window like I was in a movie, screaming because the little red car was getting left behind. Other than that, just Pa's Valiant. It was always in the garage at their home in Conjola. We went there every Christmas, every school holidays, and as a kid you're obviously not allowed near it, so it was this big sacred untouchable thing in the shed, and it just made me want to go look at it more. My parents are both very safe drivers. They're not nanas, just good, solid, middle of the road drivers. Taught me to be a safe driver. Most of the time I listened. I don't know. Dad's got a bit of a rebellious streak, but he's also a pilot, so he knows when to follow rules. Favourite was always washing cars with Dad on the weekend, or whenever he was home. Just standing in the driveway at Eastwood, sponge in hand. Usually the red Corolla. Sometimes, they had a little Seeker after that. Getting dropped off to school, Dad had an old 525 BMW, grey interior, wood grain dash. It was a limited edition, I can't for the life of me remember why. That was a beautiful car. Got driven to school every day in that. And as chance would have it, the sad memory is also the BMW, because my brother borrowed it when he was on his P's one night and wrapped it around a pole. So that was a little sad. I didn't get to drive it. I didn't have a license, but yeah, the only other sad one is the Corolla. Just had no concept of not seeing that car again. But I try not to dwell on these things. My first car was a 1999 Astra. It was an Olympic edition hatchback in mint green. Spectacularly ugly, and I loved it. It was a manual. It was a 1.8 litre. Like most P-plate cars, it'll go if you make it, but it was actually a good little car. I loved that thing. I liked it because it was a little weird. It was an Olympic edition. It was a colour that no one else wanted, and I think that's probably where the start of my pattern of weird cars started. But its name was Widget because the number plate was WJT. It would have been around the probably $5,000 or $6,000 mark. I think we sold it for $4,000 or $5,000, so I didn't really lose much on it. A lot of memories in that car, so it was worth it. Learning to drive. It was, started off just same as everyone else. You got your logbook, you did your hours. Your parents didn't really want to spend too much time doing that, but they had to, and my parents have very different teaching styles. My dad tended to take me out more than Mum. I don't think Mum trusted me entirely. Not sure. Might ask her sometime. Dad was very clear in his instructions. being a pilot, he was very good at teaching, but he would never yell at you. He would never raise his voice when you were driving, purely because it could make it worse. So if you did, say, go through a stop sign or a red light, there'd just be this very calm demeanour next to you going, that was a nice red light. And you'd take a second, and then it'd sink in and you wouldn't do it again. And then you'd do it again the next day and he'd say the same thing, and eventually you learned. But no, it was a pretty run-of-the-mill thing. I did most of my learning either in my Astra or Dad's little Corolla Seeker, which was good fun. They were all manuals. My parents both were absolutely clear that they wanted me to drive a manual and have a manual license. And the reason being that if something happened to any of my friends or family, I could drive any car. My driving test, my first one, I failed. Not through any kind of reckless behaviour, unfortunately, not a very good story. It was at the RMS in Ryde, and as it was on the corner of two main roads, and the exit driveway had a stop sign on it. And I got the car that far over the stop sign. But he didn't tell me that, so we drove around for another hour, and I thought I was doing really well, and then he brought me back in and said, you failed. Try again next week. And I was sure I was going to pass, and I deliberately booked that particular one, not because it was my closest, it was, but because it was one of the toughest ones in Sydney. And I was sure I was good enough to pass. Ironically, the second time I went to a different one. I was halfway through my test, coming down a dual lane road, and the person in front of me just randomly stopped. They weren't indicating they weren't going into a driveway or anything, they just stopped. And somehow, having never drifted a car, my reaction was to flick the steering wheel, pull the handbrake, and feather the throttle. And I drifted around this person and flicked it back and kept going and said, I'm so sorry. And yeah, I passed because I avoided a car crash. So cars I've owned, I had my Astra, so a 99 Astra. My next car was my first classic. That was a 71 Type 3 squareback. It was ruby red. It was the coolest thing I'd ever had. And I had it 4 months, and then it got written off in a crash. I was crazy about safety after that, so I went and bought a brand new Tiguan from Volkswagen. That was also a manual, so that was a 2011 Tiguan. And then I had just shy of a year in that, and I just couldn't deal with how boring it was, so I went looking for more cars. And I got a 67 Type 3. So I wasn't really looking for it, actually, I lie. I was sort of poking around some ads, and my dad was on a work trip over in LA, and he saw an ad for it, and he said, I'm going to go have a look at it for you. We haven't talked about money, but I'm sure you can figure it out. I'm going to go have a look. And then he called me about 2 hours later and told me he put a deposit on it because I didn't want to lose it. So I had to come up with about 20 grand in about a fortnight flat at the age of whatever I was, 22. I got a 61 Combi, which is panel van. That's currently still being restored. What else have I had? Got a brand new Jimny. That's good fun. That's very different to anything I've ever owned. And then a couple of years back, we spontaneously bought a 74 Volvo 144. That was supposed to be my daily driver. It's currently sitting behind that wall. That's an auto. That was I hurt my knee, and it was going to be my daily, and I was going to have a cool little old Volvo to drive around, and still working on that. But yeah, other than that, we've just got a couple of trucks for work. Just bought a Ram, which I never thought I'd own, and it's a big Ram. Sort of share a few cars with my partner Maddie as well. So we've got a 73 Beetle and a Skoda. We had an Up at one stage. That was very fun. Really regret selling the Up. Oh, I lie, I missed one. I had a Mark III Cabrio Golf that I bought for $500 with 6 months rego, and it was the most fun I've had in a long time, and it's the only convertible I've ever owned. I swore I'd never had one, and now I want another one. I've had a few cars, and I'm sure they won't be the last. look, I started out as a surf photographer, but even then, I guess there was still a thread of cars in it. You know, being surfing, there was always combis bashing about, and the pipe dream of, you know, basically looking like an endless summer poster with your surfboard and your combi. I always had that dream. That's how I ended up with my first Type 3. I was actually looking for a combi, and my brother found a Type 3 up in Newcastle. And anyway, that sort of was never really a driving force in that bit of the career. And then I had an accident and couldn't do the surfing stuff anymore, so I went back to what made me happy, which was going to old Volkswagen shows, because I'd lost my Type 3 at that point in that accident. And from that, it just sort of sprouted. People heard I was a photographer and they wanted photos of their cars, and magazines started talking to me, and so it was very much Volkswagen centric. And then it was through that I made contact with a Porsche race team, and it just went nuts. I was going to Laguna Seca, I was going all over America, it was nuts. It's cars have basically, since that accident, cars have been involved in every step of my career, and even now I run a truck business. Cars are still involved with that, and you know, we're quite frequently also transporting cars, so I don't think I can escape them if I want to. So I work on a lot of my cars myself, well, most of them. Always have. Didn't always know what I was doing, but YouTube's a hell of a thing. I don't know, I've always, I guess maybe it's a chip off my grandfather's old block, or my dad's old block. I've always wanted to tinker with things and figure them out, and I can't stand watching someone else do something. I need to do it myself. And then that only got exacerbated when I met my boyfriend. He's very much the same way inclined, so a lot of our date nights were under one of the Volkswagens with a pizza box next to us, and I don't know, like that's always made it a very happy memory for me as well, so I'm always going to keep doing that. But it's very fulfilling to know that you're doing these things yourself, and I get a little kick out of watching people get shocked by a girl under a car fixing things. I have at times been seen under a car in a dress on the way to a wedding, on the side of Military Road in Sydney. Very busy road, that. But you gotta do what you gotta do. And yeah, I don't have nice nails because there's just no point. I could probably paint them black. That's about all. But that doesn't bother me. I'm not in it for the pageant. So it's nice to know too that your cars are going to be reliable, because you're the one that got it to that point. You know, you don't have any question marks over anything. It's good. So this car behind me is Thelma. She's a 1967 squareback. So it's a Volkswagen Type 3, but it's the wagon. It's my second Type 3. First left-hand drive. First-hand left-hand drive at anything, actually. I named it Thelma after my great-grandma. She sadly passed away before she got to see that car, but the colour just reminded me of her so much. She was just the most darling, happy person. She was grateful for everything. I know I could have walked up to her and addressed that colour and she would have just fell in love with it. It made me think of her straight away. So there's a little sticker on the back that says Thelma, and there's a little yellow bird on it. She used to tell me she called it a little ditty. I guess it was a poem about canary wings and baby ducks and fluffy things. And it was just this little poem, and it always made her happy and always made me smile. And I just thought of it as soon as I saw the car, that I got to name it after her. So I think I'm the third owner. Guy that had it before me was never intended to sell it. He drove it to college in California every day, and he got accepted into a college in Germany, and it turns out that's pretty expensive. So he and his dad had tidied it up to be a forever car, and they weren't ready to sell it, but they had to. So that was luck on my part. Yeah, it's a bit of a learning curve with the left-hand drive. I got it off the boat and registered the next day, and the first thing I did was drive it from Newcastle to home, had a sleep, and then drove it to Melbourne for a car show, having never driven a left-hand drive before. So there may have been an incident in St Kilda where I went around a roundabout the wrong direction. But that was a quick learning curve. Yeah, no, it's honestly, that car is an extension of me. There is not a single bit of regret, and even when something breaks, there's less than 2 swear words, because I just can't be angry. I mean, how are you angry at that face? It's not possible. So yeah, that's my baby. They're all my babies, but that's my baby. Car community is a very big part of my life. Not as much lately, just because I'm working a lot, but most of my friends and a lot of my best friends are from car communities. Started off just going to the odd Volkswagen thing. I took that to Volkswagen Nationals, and you meet people and they go, we're going to have coffee, and it just escalates. And now it escalates interstate. It's a pure kind of thing. They get it. Everyone's there for the same reason. They're all from different walks of life, and they become a very special part of your life. And that also helps prop you up. It's good for your mental health. It's good for feeling like you're a part of something, feeling like you're preserving something. But not necessarily the old stuff either. I'm part of car groups for my Jimny. We've got Skoda groups. It's the car communities have brought me a lot of things over the years and given me the opportunity to give a lot too. I like sharing my time. I like sharing my cars with people, and even if it's just giving someone's kid a ride around the block because they've always loved that type of car. What is it to you? But it might be the best day of their life. Volkswagens are relatable. Everyone's got a Volkswagen story. Either they were conceived in one, they were born in one, they met someone in one, they conceived their kid in one. It's like their neighbour had one. Everybody has a Volkswagen story, and because of that, they bring so much joy to so many people, and just being the instigator of that joy just gives me such a kick to know that I'm bringing something good into the world and keeping something good in the world. But no, Volks, I don't know, they've always just been such a classic design to me. They're just such a beautiful, versatile range of cars, and they have such a, granted, checkered history at times, but such a fascinating history too, not just some of the less favourable stuff, but they're very innovative too. So I don't know, I've just always gravitated towards them, and I seem to not be able to get away from them. The Porsches are a bit of an extension of that, but they're also just one of the most spectacular things I've ever seen in my life. Especially the 356s, they're just, you could not out-design that car. It's spectacular. So yeah, I don't know. They just, at the end of the day, they make me happy, and they make me happy, they make other people happy. That's all I care about. My dream car is, there's a few. The one that comes to mind most often is about a 54 356 Pre-A with a bent windscreen and beehive tail lights. And those that know me know I've spent a lot of time around them, and that probably only made that problem worse. I've been offered one, which cruelly was $80,000 when it was worth a lot more, but at the age of 24 or 25 or whatever I was, where do you find 80 grand? I've been offered a variation of that. I was offered a 57 Speedster, one owner, matching numbers, low Ks, garage its whole life. Owner was not going to sell it to anyone. She had to pick who she sold it to, and I was one of 3 people she'd offered it to in 10 years. And again, where do you find that kind of money? And that was a darn sight more. Ask me 10, 15 years ago what my dream car is, I would have said a split-screen combi, and I'm fortunate enough that I now have that. It's not running, it's not on the road yet, but getting it's the hardest part, so I'm working on that one. The only other one that would mean a lot to me would be owning an old Brabham race car, and that's obviously got some pretty personal ties with my grandfather, and he would have been more than over the moon seeing one of those again. Yes, I've done a heap of big road trips. Thelma, when I took her to that show in Melbourne, she rolled off the boat. Well, sorry, she came off the the boat in a container. The container went on a train to Newcastle. I drove to Newcastle, picked her up, drove her home on a permit, and then drove to Melbourne. So it was supposed to just be straight down the Hume to this car show, and I got diverted down to Ulladulla because there was bushfires. Ended up spending some time with my grandparents and going the long way around the coast, so I got a cool little coast road trip out of it. And then after the car shows in Melbourne, I kind of just had a bit of a screw it moment and decided I wasn't going to work for a couple of weeks and kept driving. And I drove from Melbourne, kind of just bumbled my way up north, ended up near Foster, went to the beach, kept going to Coffs, stayed in Coffs Harbour for a bit, and then I was like, you know what? Because I went down to the south coast through the ACT, so I'd already done 3 states at this point, and I was like, right, well, I'm already in my second country. How many states can I do? So I'm like, well, I better get to Queensland. So I kept going to Queensland. So I parked on the headland at Darren Bar and put one set of wheels on the New South Wales side and one set on the Queensland side and took a photo. Then I spent a week in Queensland hanging out with some backpackers and just generally talking to people that wanted to look at my car. Went for a surf. It was great. That's probably the most memorable one I've done. I've done a couple. Did a road trip with my mum up to Valor, to the Volkswagen Festival. So she's got a 67 as well, but hers is a Beetle, and it's almost identical colour. So we had the 2 of us going up the highway together, dodging trucks. That was pretty special. Mum doesn't go on many big drives, so it was nice to do that with her, and we had 1 dog in each car. So we had a Kelpie hanging out the quarter window of the Beetle and the Border Collie out the passenger side of the Type 3, but because it's a left-hand drive, they were both next to each other and woofing at each other the whole way up the highway. So yeah, there's been a few good ones, but I've got some ideas tucked away. I'd like to take it on a big outback trip and go see some of Western New South Wales. And I've also done some road trips with one of my very good friends down in Melbourne. One of them was in a 356 Speedster, an Intermechanica, and we were tagging along on a 356 club run. They were going down to Lorne and having a nice dinner and cruising some nice roads and then heading back to Melbourne, and we just didn't want a bar of that second bit, so we kept going. We went through all kinds of terrain. We went through the beach forest, we went down the Otways, we had the convertible trying to fly off, so we tied it down with the straps off our duffel bags. We went up dirt roads and sprayed mud at backpackers. We were high as kites at the hotel in Lorne because the one little washer on the fuel sender was gone. So we were subject to fuel inhalation for the better part of 24 hours. And then decided to air out the fuel-soaked mats on the railing of the veranda for our hotel room and left the door open for the fresh air, which wasn't so fresh at that point. So we giggled ourselves to sleep and were feeling pretty sorry for ourselves the next day. It was also doing most of that driving in torrential rain. And I can now say I've drunk water from the windscreen of a 356 at 120 kilometres an hour. That was a whole other experience. That was next level. And we did another road trip also with my partner. Hired a combi for one of our birthdays, one of the combi campers, the big snail things, and we brought our little Beetle and Cub camper trailer down, and we went down the Great Ocean Road and camped and had fires and waved at every single person that smiled at the cars, and it was just perfect. And it just summarizes everything to do with why I have these cars, why I continue to be around these people that have cars. They bring so much happiness, so much freedom, so many memories to life that I can't really think of anything else that would bring that, to be honest. I don't know, there's something about it that you can't quite put your finger on, you can't quite put into words, but Yeah, they're just. I mean, at this point, they're more an extension of the family than a possession, and they always will be. But no, they've brought me more good than I could ever have imagined, and for that I am entirely grateful. Always will be.